Yo, what's up guys, it's Talon. Today I'm going to be giving you guys a champion pool guide. So in this intro, I'm just going to be talking over some gameplay that's not really relevant. And I'm just going to explain to you guys some general tips for creating a champion pool. And then I'm going to go more in depth into each role, explaining what's important to note in those specific roles. So first, I think it's very important to have a limited number of champions in your champion pool. For me, that number is typically 2 to 4. The specific number is not super important, but around 2 to 4 champions to me is a good mixture of having enough champs where it's versatile so you don't get countered easily, while still having a small enough champion pool where you have time to learn all of those champions really effectively. If you try to learn too many champions, it's going to be really hard to become a master of all of them, and instead you're not really going to know all the specific matchups and everything for each game with those champs. So 2 to 4 is going to be a good number for that. Next, you're going to want at least one champion that's good to blind pick. So blind picking basically means you're picking it early. You pick before you see a lot of the enemy comp. You pick before you see a lot of your team comp. And the reason this is going to be important is because then you can't get countered. You'll always have a champion you can pick in any game that will be good at all points, so you don't have to worry about them picking certain champions or not knowing what they're going to play and all of that. Next, it's going to be important that it fits your playstyle. So, I mean, some people are just not good at playing assassins, for example, like myself. So I just prefer to stick to more like bruiser type of champions, tankier champs, or ranged damage dealers. So whatever type of playstyle you like, find champs within that playstyle while they're still able to fit some of the other categories, you know, being blind pickable, being versatile, and all of that type of thing. After that, versatility is going to be important. So again, you might ideally want in certain roles to have a tank as well as like a damage dealer. You know, like in top lane, for example, you might want a split pusher as well as a tank or something like that. Next, make sure that it's actually fun to play. Just simply like you obviously want to be playing champs you enjoy. So, you know, these are general guidelines. It doesn't mean that you can't one trick a champ that you just really enjoy playing. You're just going to have to, you know, play a bit differently in that case, but typically it's going to be good to choose about 2 to 4 champs and make sure you enjoy them, they fit your play style, but they're still versatile enough and good enough to be blind picked that you're not going to struggle in games or get countered too easily. So anyways, now that we've talked about all that, let's get into more of the role specific parts of building a champion pool. Okay guys, so we'll start off with top lane. So for me, top lane kind of has 3 things I would say are pretty important for a champion pool. So initially, I would want a bruiser slash tanky champion. So if you're into playing tanks, you can play a real tank like a Malphite and Ornn, even the new champion, those types of champs, like full-on tanks. And that's going to be really good to just have someone who's really good in team fights if your team ever needs a tank, of course. Now, if you're not really a fan of playing tanks, because I know many of us don't like tanks, we can go for more of a bruiser who has some CC and is more versatile. That way, you still have a champ who can engage and you can pick when you don't have a tank, but he's not a full-on tank if you just don't enjoy that. So for me, when I chose my top lane champion pool, that champion was Wukong for me, because he is a bruiser and he does a lot of damage, so he's still really fun to play, but he has a great ultimate to engage and he can still build very tanky, so I still have that engage if my team doesn't pick any type of tank. After that, I think it's quite important to have some type of split pushing champion. Again, it doesn't have to be a full split pusher if you don't enjoy those champs. So again, Wukong is a champ that can split push while still not having to. However, if you are a fan of this split push carry type of playstyle, you can pick plenty of different champions from like Camille, Fiora, Jace, Jax, all of these types of champs that like might end up going a Hullbreaker in a lot of games. They're going to be great split pushers to pick, and I think it's important to have kind of a mixture of those split pushers and then those bruisers slash tanks. And then lastly, I think it's quite important as well to have a tank counter. Just usually tank counters are going to be champions with true damage. So let's take Gwen, for example. She does true damage. Camille, Fiora, they all do a lot of true damage in their kits. So any champ with a decent amount of true damage is usually going to be a good counter to tanks. So typically having one of those in their champ pool is going to be good. And then lastly, I'll just mention my champion pool. So my champion pool for top lane when I ended up pushing the challenger was Renekton, Fiora, and Wukong. Wukong being that bruiser slash tank champion that I talked about, Fiora being both the split pusher and the tank counter, and then Renekton was kind of that middle ground where he had a lot of high burst damage and I was able to really assassinate squishies very easily, but he was also very strong in lane and he was also still quite tanky. So if we're talking about the playstyle of mine that entire champion pool really fit, that would be early game champions. All of those champions I talked about, Wukong, Fiora, Renekton, are very, very strong in the early game. And yet I was still able to meet all of these other categories of having a bruiser slash tank, a split pusher, and a tank counter. So that's just an example of a champion pool that I had, as well as some important things for top lane to keep in mind. Okay, so now moving on to the jungle. The initial thing that I would say that's important is to have some type of carry champion in your champion pool. So this could be a champion like Kha'Zix, Camille, Diana, Rengar, just any champ that deals a lot of damage and does really well with a lot of gold. Especially in the jungle role, I feel like carry champions are extremely strong just due to how much access to gold you really have in this role. So any type of carry champion is going to be great, and I'm just thinking, in general, I think that's very, very important to have some type of carry in your arsenal. Next is going to be some type of engaged champion. This could be a Vi, a Jarvan, those types of champs, and they're typically also going to be really good at ganking, so that kind of goes hand in hand. You want to both be good at engaging as well as ganking, and the reason for this is if you ever have a lot of late game laners, you can use these ganking champions to end up facilitating them to the late game, ganking for them so that they're able to get through the early lanes well. You know, you could get like a Vayne, for example, in the bot lane, or a Kayle in the top lane. Normally, they're going to struggle a lot in lane, but if you end up ganking them and kind of making their game a lot easier, then it's just going to be more effective in getting your teammates ahead and winning those games. And then lastly, having a mixture of AP and AD is going to be pretty nice. Personally, I didn't even use any AP champions really, but ideally you would have some type of AP champ mix as well as AD. This way you're not going to get countered by having a full AD comp or something like that. And then for my champion pool, it was really only 2 champions that I mainly played. I tried out plenty of other champs, but I ended up really having a lot of success with Camille and Xin Zhao. And so Camille and Xin Zhao both fall under that carry category to an extent, but they also fall under that engage category. So they're both good at engaging as well as carrying. And then Xin Zhao was that champ that has pretty good ganking. He's able to gank rather early and get a lot of people ahead early, whereas the Camille is going to be more of that late game monster. And then because I didn't have AP and AD, I ended up having Camille for that true damage, which still allowed me to be fine even if we were full AD. So anyways, that's it for jungle. Now let's go on to mid lane. Okay guys, so now moving on to the mid lane. This is by far the most versatile role where there is a plethora of different champions of all different types. So starting off, it's often going to be good to have an assassin. This is not always necessary, but typically being a good assassin player is going to be quite good when they pick a lot of squishy champions. So having any type of Akali, Katarina, whatever type of champ. If you want an easier assassin, Diana is one of the more easy ones to play, or Fizz is another easy one. So if you're looking to just pick up a rather simple one, Fizz or Diana is going to be great for you. Next is going to be a tank / engage. This is going to be a champ like Galio, like Gragas. They can build AP, they can still go for that damage, but they still got that engage in them, and if you want, you can still build them tank. Next is going to be mages, so champs like Orianna, Vex, Zoe. These are definitely going to be effective as well, kind of having a mixture of assassins, tanks, and mages. And then lastly, you're going to want a champ that deals AD, so that could be, if your assassin could be an AD assassin, you could pick a Zed or a Yone. You could pick, you know, a Jace, a Lucian mid, those types of things. And then another important thing is going to be having a champ that's really good in lane. So if you want to play, again, a Lucian or a Jace, or just even a Akali's pretty good for an assassin in lane. Zoe is a good laner. Just having a good laner so that if you ever really just feel like they pick a late game champ and you want to punish them for picking that late game champ, you can play some type of early game champ to really bully them. Now for my champ pool specifically, it was a bit strange. So I had 2 seasons where I played mid lane. Initially, I played solo queue only and got about 10 marks from Challenger. And for this, I mainly just played Vex and Ziggs. So again, versatility is not always super important. I just had 2 mages. I just really liked mages, so I played them. And I got pretty close to Challenger. But when I went into my second season where I finally did get Challenger, I ended up switching my champion pool and just pretty much one-tricking. I really only played Jace mid lane. And so I want to talk now kind of about one-tricking, because I know a decent amount of people do enjoy one-tricking, and I think that's perfectly fine. I think an important thing to understand when you are going to decide to one-trick is you have to be able to figure out exactly how every matchup works on this champ. So if you ever plan to one-trick a champ and you don't know how a matchup works, make sure when you're playing in that matchup, as soon as you get that matchup, you play super aggressively. You try to learn exactly how everything works in that matchup, what you can and can't go in on. Even if it looks like a dumb play, just try to learn, is it even possible for me to maybe kill someone there? This way, if you do one trick, you're able to really figure out even how bad matchups are played and how to really play in any type of different matchup. And now Jace specifically for a one trick was really good because of how versatile he is. He can change up his build based on game. He can go a bruiser style, he can go a split pushing style, he can go a full carry poke type of style. So oftentimes if you're going to one trick a champ, I think having someone pretty versatile is going to be important. But if you just really like playing a champ, you decide to one trick, that's perfectly fine. Again, just make sure that you're really going full limit testing until you understand exactly how this champ works. And then once you do understand all of the limits of this champ, all of the matchups, that's when you can play him or her to their full potential. Okay, so now moving on to ADC. So I'm going to be honest, guys, ADCs have a pretty similar job generally. It's deal damage. So if you want to one trick, this is especially a good role to do that in. However, there are some important things to take into mind or take into account, and that's going to be, you're going to kind of want an early and a late game champ ideally. So some good examples of early game champs are going to be like if you're going Lethality Varus, if you're going Draven, Lucian. These types of champs are going to be very good early, and again, that's going to allow you to punish late game champs. If your teammate, for example, picks a really good early game support, you can combo that with a good early game champ who can follow up really well with your early game support. Now, on the other hand, you have the late game champs, you have the Vaynes, the Tristanas, and these are going to be really good if you just don't have much late game insurance on your team. If, say, your team picks a lot of early game champs in other parts of the map, then you might want this late game insurance to just simply be able to carry if you do get to the late game. Now, another important thing is going to be understanding kind of matchups. So short range versus long range is going to be pretty important. So often the long range champs are going to have a big advantage in lane. This is why, for example, Lucian kind of gets countered by the Caitlyn, or Draven gets countered by a Caitlyn. So if you're going to have a champion pool, you're probably going to want to have a long range and a short range champ. That way you can pick that long range champ kind of into whatever. And then that you pick that short range champ if they pick something that can't really punish your early game or doesn't have much range to punish you. And then lastly, ideally you would find an AP champ. Now, obviously you're playing ADC. It's not always easy to find an AP champ. Corki is a champion who, with his passive, his auto attacks get converted to AP. There's going to be some other champs with good true damage, like Vayne, for example, with his true damage, or with her true damage, is going to be able to, kind of fill that role, because you're still going to be able to shred tanks even if your comp is full AD. And then maybe you could even try some like Ziggs bot lane or Orianna bot lane if you like that type of stuff. But in general, just going to be a mix of an early and a late game champ. Want some long range and some short range, and then ideally you throw some AP in there. For me specifically, my champ pool ended up really being Varus. I played Lethality Varus, armor penetration build. I played Corki, and I played Ashe. So Ashe was really that supportive long range champ that I was kind of able to pick whenever, and I was just able to help my team when my team had some good carries on other parts of the map. Varus was that really good lane bully, just like Ashe. They're both really good in lane, and I was kind of a Varus one trick for a while, so it just made sense to play him as well. And then Corki was that late game insurance policy, as well as the champ that did AP. So for me, that was my champ pool, and generally that's what you're going to want for ADC. Alright guys, so lastly we have support, and for support it's really as simple to me as having an enchanter as well as a tank. So typically you're going to want to be playing that tank in games where you don't have any tanks on your team, or in games where you have champions that can combo really well with your CC. So for example, a Draven is really good with like a Thresh or a Nautilus, or like Kai'Sa and Samira are really good at following up on a lot of engages from different champions. And then on the other hand, enchanters are often going to be really strong at getting your teammates out of lane, especially enchanters like Nami or Karma. Those types of champs are going to be very good at getting weaker early game champs like an Ezreal, like a Vayne, out of lane and into the late game. So you're just going to want to have a good mix of enchanters and tanks, as well as a good mix of early and late game champs in support. So an example of a good early game champ in support, again, would be Nami, Karma, Thresh. And then some late game champs are like going to be Sona, Yuumi kind of falls under that category, Soraka. Like those are going to be some good late game champs. Just having a mixture of both of those is going to be pretty nice. And yeah, that's going to be about it for support. Now on to my support champion pool. What I play is mainly Thresh and Nautilus for some tanks who are good in the early game. And then I play some good early game champs and enchanters, which are Karma and Nami. So for me, I really like having that early game support presence, so I just generally play a lot of champs that are quite good in the early game, but they still fall under the category of, having good, having a good mix of tanks and enchanters, and then being able to combo with the variety of different ADCs. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this vid on champion pools. I hope you guys learned a thing or two. Let me know your thoughts on champion pool. Let me know your champion pools in the comments below. I'm kind of curious to see what type of champs you guys play. And yeah, that's about it. If you guys have any future content suggestions or any things that I could possibly change in this video, feel free to let me know, and I'll see you guys later.